It was a mistake to stay silent the first time. Claire knew that now, standing at the kitchen counter, her hand resting on the cold marble as she watched her husband, Jonah, stir sugar into his coffee. He didn't know she'd found out yet, or maybe he did. In the beginning, Claire and Jonah had been inseparable. Young professionals building lives over late-night arguments about furniture, laughing about money, making lists of baby names even though they weren't ready. Claire, a graphic designer, and Jonah, a lawyer climbing the slow, grimy ladder of corporate law. Life was tight but textured, full. It had changed slowly at first. Longer work hours, missed calls. The vague, numbing drift that all their friends half-joked about. Claire had noticed, but life had ways of smoothing over the jagged edges. Until 2 weeks ago, when Claire opened their joint bank account to transfer money for a surprise anniversary gift and found a hotel charge. Downtown. At a boutique hotel she knew neither of them could afford casually. At first, she wanted to believe it was for a client, a settlement meeting maybe. Jonah was careful, methodical, not reckless. But then came the texts. Accidental maybe. A name she didn't recognize, Tessa. Coded messages, light on details but thick with familiarity. Claire didn't confront him. She followed him. One Friday evening, sitting low in her Honda Civic outside the Marlowe Hotel, she watched him slip inside, adjusting his tie. He looked younger in that moment, almost relieved. She stayed for hours. He didn't come out until nearly midnight, his hair mussed, his jacket gone. She didn't follow him home. She couldn't. In the present, Claire set her coffee down, watching Jonah fumble with the sugar packet, spilling half of it onto the counter. "You're jittery," she said casually. He smiled at her, the old Jonah smile that once made her knees weak. "Big case today," Claire nodded. "You'll be late again tonight?" He hesitated. "Yeah, probably." The lie hung there, cloying and thick as smoke. Minor characters. Laura, Claire's best friend, a no-nonsense nurse who suspects something is wrong. She pushes Claire to confront Jonah, even floats the idea of hiring a private investigator. Tessa Wren, the other woman, who is not some sultry seductress, but a junior associate at Jonah's firm, ambitious, anxious, and as conflicted as Claire. Detective Rios, a local detective investigating a string of robberies in the neighborhood, which oddly converge near the Marlowe Hotel. Claire, dragged in as a potential witness, begins to suspect Jonah might be involved in something darker than just infidelity. Narrative style, close third person, focusing primarily on Claire's emotional landscape, but occasionally slipping briefly into Jonah's viewpoint, revealing his guilt, fear, and complicated love for both women. Key emotional themes: trust versus willful ignorance. Claire questioning whether she missed signs out of trust, laziness, or fear. Betrayal's complexity. Jonah doesn't just choose Tessa. He's trapped, bored, ashamed, and craving some lost version of himself that he thinks he can reclaim with someone new. The role of secrets. Both are keeping secrets. Claire hides her. Knowledge. Jonah hides his betrayal. Possibility of redemption versus revenge. Claire teeters between confronting Jonah and destroying him, personally and legally, or trying to salvage what remains of their marriage. External pressures. The crime investigation adds a layer of suspense and danger. Jonah may have covered up evidence to protect Tessa, who stole documents out of fear of being fired. Key scenes. The confrontation, after Detective Rios drops. Hints about someone fitting Jonah's description on hotel security footage on a night a client's laptop was stolen. Claire presses Jonah until he admits to the affair. Tearful, broken. Jonah's confession. He claims he was protecting Tessa after she panicked and took confidential client files, fearing she would be blamed. He says the affair was a mistake, that it meant nothing. Claire doesn't believe him. Laura's ultimatum. Laura urges Claire to expose Jonah, both for the theft and the affair. Claire recoils, realizing revenge won't heal her. Final choice. Claire meets Tessa in secret. Tessa, trembling and guilt-ridden, apologizes, but pleads for Claire's silence, promising she'll resign and disappear. Claire sees in Tessa the same fear she once felt when she first married Jonah. The fear of losing everything. Ending. Open. Bittersweet. Claire moves out temporarily, leaving Jonah to sit alone in their too bright, too silent house. The last scene. Claire stands at a bridge overlooking Lake Michigan, clutching her wedding ring. She doesn't throw it in. She slides it into her pocket. She turns, unsure if she's walking toward reconciliation, reinvention, or something else entirely. Claire waited until the dishwasher hummed behind them, and the house had taken on that hollow quiet, the kind that came after routines but before sleep. Jonah was sitting on the edge of the couch, hunched over his phone, scrolling endlessly like he was trying to outrun a thought. She stood across from him, arms crossed, heart a slow sledgehammer rhythm in her chest. "Jonah," she said, steady. He glanced up, distracted. "Hmm?" She took a breath. "I know." The words landed like a dropped plate. Jonah's thumb froze above the screen. His eyes lifted, quick, guarded, calculating. "Know what?" "I saw the charges. I saw the texts. I followed you to the Marlowe Hotel. I know everything." Her voice didn't break the way she thought it might. That scared her most. How calm she sounded. He said nothing at first, just looked at her like she was someone he didn't quite recognize. She waited for denial, outrage, tears. Instead, he leaned forward and put the phone down gently on the coffee table. "Claire," he said, voice hoarse. "It wasn't what you think." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "That line only works on people who don't know what they think." He stood slowly, as if movement could disarm her. "I didn't plan it. It was one night, then it became two, and then, I don't know, I didn't stop it." "So it's been months." Her voice wobbled now. She hated herself for it. He didn't answer. Claire crossed the room and shoved the hotel receipts into his chest. "This wasn't an accident. This was work, scheduling. You chose this." Jonah's face crumpled at the edges. He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck like a confession might be hiding in his skin. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "It was a mistake. I was stupid. I don't know what I thought. I didn't mean to hurt you. And yet," she said. Silence settled in the room like ash. Then Claire said, "The detective came by today." Jonah blinked. "Rios?" She asked about the hotel. "About someone matching your description showing up the same night a laptop was stolen from one of the clients you were negotiating with. She said the person on video had your gate." Jonah paled. His eyes darted away for the briefest moment. "I didn't steal anything. But you know who did." His mouth opened, then shut. "It wasn't like that." "Tessa?" Claire said the name like poison. Jonah sat back down. He buried his face in his hands. "She panicked. She took it. She thought she'd be blamed for the leak. I didn't know until after." Claire stared at him, eyes burning. "And instead of reporting her, you covered for her, slept with her." She was going to lose everything. "So was I," she snapped. "So am I." Jonah looked up, eyes rimmed red. "I didn't mean to fall. I missed being someone else. Someone not exhausted and married and full of regrets." Claire turned away from him, unable to look at the face that had once felt like home. "And what now?" she asked quietly. Jonah hesitated. "Do you want me to leave?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. Instead, she walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at the cartons and leftovers like they could offer clarity. Behind her, Jonah didn't move. The hum of the dishwasher filled the room again. Domestic noise, mechanical, safe. She picked up a wine glass, then set it back down. "I don't want an apology," she said. "I want to know if you still respect me enough not to lie anymore." "I do," Jonah said. "I swear to God." Claire turned and faced him. "Then tell me everything, every detail, and then I'll decide if I want you to still be here in the morning." He nodded, slowly. "Okay." End of excerpt. Jonah didn't sleep that night. He lay on the couch, the one they picked out 2 years ago after fighting in the middle of a crate and barrel showroom over leather versus linen, staring at the ceiling, trying to calculate the moment everything began to rot. Claire hadn't said a word after his confession. She went upstairs, footsteps soft, deliberate, like she was walking on something sacred she didn't want to break more than it already was. At 3:12 a.m., he got up. The floor creaked under his weight. He hated the sound of it. How everything now sounded like proof. He moved to the kitchen and stood in the dark, fingers brushing the cold countertop. From here, he could see the entryway mirror. His reflection looked older, smaller, like he'd been shrinking inside the lie. He didn't love Tessa. He told himself that over and over. Tessa was a mirror too, one that reflected back a man who still had options, who wasn't bound by lawn care schedules and intimacy calendars and the slow corrosion of certainty, but even he knew that was a weak excuse. The truth was messier, meaner. Tessa was scared. That night at the firm, she had come to him with a look. He recognized desperation wrapped in control. She'd taken the flash drive, copied the files, said it was just for protection, said she'd delete them. But then someone broke into the client's suite at the Marlowe, and the laptop vanished. And suddenly, it wasn't just about infidelity, it was about obstruction. He should have turned her in, should have called it in and let her fall. Instead, he'd gone to the hotel that night to retrieve the drive. That was supposed to be the end of it, but it wasn't. She cried. He comforted her. He told himself he owed her that much. And then things blurred, and he hated himself for how easy it had been. Claire knew now, not just about the affair, about the cover-up, about everything that made him a worse man than he thought he was. A buzz pulled him from the dark spiral. His phone lit up. Tessa. "Heard anything? We need to talk. Please don't shut me out." He stared at the message for a full minute, then deleted it. He didn't want her voice in his life anymore, but the problem with crossing lines was that you couldn't always tell how far you'd gone until you looked back and couldn't see where you started. Scene shift morning, Claire's POV Claire. Stood at the bathroom sink, rinsing her mouth out, the bitter tang of old wine and new rage still lingering on her tongue. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the confrontation like a scene she wished she could recut. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the cheating or the calm way Jonah had admitted it. The practicality of it. No drama, just failure. Confessed like a parking ticket. She wiped steam from the mirror and studied her reflection. Her face looked foreign, pale, older. Downstairs, she heard cabinets opening. The ordinary sound of Jonah pretending it was an ordinary day. She went down slowly. He was dressed in a gray suit, the tie on the table next to a half-eaten piece of toast. He looked at her like a man checking for landmines. "I'll tell Rios the truth," he said. "No preamble. That I knew, that I didn't report it right away." Claire blinked. "You think that's enough?" He exhaled, then nodded. "No." "What about her?" "She's quitting, transferring out of state. Says she'll delete everything." Claire crossed her arms. "You believe her?" "I don't know." They stood in silence, the air between them felt bruised. "I'm not defending you," she said finally. "You hurt me. You made choices you can't unmake. But if you cover for her again, if you drag me through one more lie, I'll destroy you, Jonah." He nodded, slow and Hollow. I wouldn't blame you, he said quietly. End of chapter 13. Claire chose a public place. She wanted witnesses, noise, something neutral, not a hotel bar, not a coffee shop near the firm. She picked an art gallery near the lake, one with high white walls and audio guides and no corners to hide in. Tessa arrived 5 minutes late. She looked smaller than Claire expected. Not younger, not more beautiful, just fragile. The kind of person who spent too much time second-guessing everything she said. Claire pretended to study a sculpture, a twisted arc of rusted metal reaching toward the ceiling. She didn't turn when Tessa stopped beside her. I wasn't. Sure you'd come, Tessa said, voice barely above a whisper. Claire didn't look at her. Neither was I. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that wasn't quite awkward but wasn't kind either. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Tessa said. Claire turned to her, eyes sharp. That line really making the rounds, huh? Tessa flinched but didn't retreat. Claire gestured toward the next room, a quiet corner with a few benches and one large abstract painting in crimson and black. They sat, legs crossed away from each other like magnets resisting contact. You knew he was married? Claire said. I did. Did that matter to you? Tessa took a shaky breath. It should have. At first I told myself it was just attention, that it didn't mean anything. He was kind. He listened. I didn't have anyone else at the firm. But then it escalated, and I couldn't stop it. Claire narrowed her eyes. You could have. You didn't. Tessa's voice caught. I know. The gallery's overhead speaker whispered something about expressionist movements in the postmodern age. Claire folded her hands in her lap. You put him in the middle of a criminal investigation. Tessa's mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at her shoes. I panicked. That night I copied the files. I thought someone was going to use them against me. I thought I could hold on to them, just for leverage. But then the laptop went missing and Jonah covered for you, Claire finished. Of course he did. Tessa looked up, her eyes brimming. I didn't ask him to. I didn't want that. Sure. You did. No, Tessa said firmly. I wanted him to protect me, not lie for me. Claire almost laughed. Same difference. Tessa's voice dropped. I loved him, you know. Claire met her gaze. Then you didn't know him. Tessa didn't respond. They sat there, surrounded by silence and color and the unspoken weight of shared destruction. I'm not going to the police, Claire said finally. Not yet. Tessa's shoulders sagged in relief. Too much relief. Claire leaned in. But hear me, she whispered. If you contact him again, if you try to keep him in this mess, pull him back into your orbit, I will burn everything down. Yours, his, mine. Understand? Tessa nodded, tears finally falling. Yes. Claire stood. She felt nothing, or everything. It was hard to tell where the anger stopped and the grief began. She walked toward the exit. Behind her, the audio guide clicked to the next exhibit. She didn't hear it. Outside, the wind off the lake hit her face like a slap. Cold, sharp, real. She didn't cry, but she also didn't go home. End of chapter 14. Detective Anna Rios sat in her unmarked sedan, watching the glass lobby of Dalton and Wexler LLP through the rain-streaked windshield. The firm was all brushed metal and ego, the kind of place where men in $1,000 suits destroyed lives, on paper, and called it strategy. She tapped her fingers on the steering wheel, waiting. It had been 3 weeks since the laptop went missing, 2 since Jonah Bishop's name started showing up in whispers. She'd seen the hotel footage 6 times, grainy, low-res, but the posture matched. The way he moved, always. A half-second slower than the men around him, like he was thinking 3 moves ahead. She didn't trust men like that. They were always the ones who thought they were too clever to fall, but it wasn't Jonah she was after, not exactly. It was the why. The laptop belonged to a client involved in a class action lawsuit worth millions. Environmental damages, big pharma, very dirty money. The files were encrypted, but the theft wasn't random. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for, and now the client's case was falling apart. Rios opened her door and stepped into the rain. She liked it, how it kept people honest. You couldn't fake your way through a storm. Inside, she flashed her badge at the receptionist and asked for Jonah Bishop. The woman blinked, stiffened slightly, and picked up the phone. "He's in a meeting," she said. "I can leave a message." "I'll wait," Rios said simply. The receptionist didn't argue. 10 minutes later, Jonah emerged from a glass conference room looking like a man who'd just heard the ground was about to open under him. "Detective," he said, voice tight. "I wasn't expecting—" "I like surprises," Rios said. "You have a few minutes?" He nodded, gesturing toward an empty office. They stepped inside. No windows, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a framed diploma hanging slightly crooked. She sat. Didn't offer small talk. "I know about the drive," she said. Jonah didn't blink. "What drive?" Rios smiled faintly. "You're a smart guy, but you're not a criminal, and that's a problem, because you're covering for someone who is." He exhaled slowly. "There's nothing to cover." "You went to the hotel that night. You said it was a settlement meeting. But the room wasn't booked under your name, was it? Or under the firm's?" Silence. "You protected her," Rios said. "Tessa Wren. She's been in over her head for months. Brilliant, ambitious, unstable. Classic mix. Let me guess. She took the files to keep leverage, and you thought you could fix it for her." Jonah didn't speak. Rios leaned in. "You're not the first man to throw away a life for someone who made you feel new again. But that's not the part that interests me. What does interest me is the timing. The missing laptop coincides with a leak that tanked a multi-million-dollar claim. I'm not just here on a theft case anymore." Jonah looked up then. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying whoever accessed those files didn't just want them for leverage. They sold them. And you're now part of a federal investigation into corporate sabotage and conspiracy to commit fraud." Jonah's face went still, pale. "I didn't sell anything," he said. "But you know who did," Rios said, "or who passed them along." He swallowed, hard. "Claire doesn't know that part." "She will," Rios said. "Eventually." Jonah stood, shaky. "What do you want from me?" "I want the name of whoever bought that data," Rios said. "And I want it before your wife hands me enough motive to charge you for accessory." Jonah looked out the door toward the lobby. Somewhere out there, his career and his life was still pretending to hold together. "Can I talk to her first?" he asked. Rios paused, then nodded. "You've got one day." Claire was in the kitchen again, chopping carrots she wasn't planning to eat, when Jonah walked in. She didn't turn around, she didn't have to. The air changed when he entered now. Thicker, heavier, like something rotting at the edges of what used to be trust. He stood there for a moment, just breathing. She kept slicing. "I need to tell you everything," he said quietly. Her knife hit the cutting board harder than necessary. "I'm listening," she said, setting the blade. Down, finally facing him. Jonah looked wrecked. His tie was gone, shirt wrinkled, hair damp from the rain. For once, he didn't try to neaten himself before speaking. And somehow, that made Claire believe him more than anything else could have. "Tessa didn't just steal the files for herself," he said. "She sold them to a shell company, connected to the defense." Claire felt the world tilt, but she didn't move. She said it was just to protect herself, leverage against being scapegoated. But she lied. She was always planning to profit, and He broke off, pressing a hand to his face. "I didn't know until after the laptop went missing. By then it was too late. I should have come forward. I didn't." I tried to manage it. Keep it from blowing up. Claire crossed her arms, pinning herself in place. You thought you could contain it, she said. Jonah nodded. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would die quietly. That if I protected her, she'd walk away. And we could go back to normal. Claire gave a short, humorless laugh. Normal? I was wrong, Jonah said. About everything. He looked at her now, full on, the way people look at cliffs they're about to fall off. Detective Rios gave me until tomorrow to give her a name, he said. Or she's coming after me. Hard. Claire felt something sharp break loose inside. Her. Not rage, exactly. Not sorrow. Just something wild and clean like winter air. So what are you going to do? She asked. Jonah's voice dropped. What do you want me to do? The question twisted in the air between them. Claire could almost see the futures branching out. She could tell him to turn Tessa in, let Jonah crawl out of this, battered but free. She could let him fall, let him pay for the ways he betrayed. Her not just in bed, but in every cowardly lie after. She could walk away altogether. Choices had weight. She felt all of it pressing down. I want you, Claire said slowly. To stop asking me to save you. Jonah flinched. I want you to make one goddamn decision without looking to me to clean it up, she said, voice hardening. You chose her. You chose to lie. Now you choose what kind of man you want to be when this ends. She stepped closer, so close she could see the flecks of gray at his temples, the way exhaustion hollowed him out. But know this, Jonah. Whatever you decide, it changes everything. For us. Jonah closed his eyes just for a second, like he was imprinting her. Words onto the back of his skull. Then he nodded. I'll turn her in, he said, voice rough. Claire stared at him, trying to see if he meant it. If there was still enough of the man she married to, salvage anything from the wreckage. Finally, she turned away, picking up the knife again, resuming the mindless rhythm of chopping. She didn't tell him she forgave him. She didn't tell him she hated him. She said nothing at all. Behind her, she heard Jonah leave, the door clicking shut like the closing of a cell. End of chapter 16. The story is nearing its climax. Chapter 17. Crossroads. Jonah. The precinct smelled like coffee gone cold and old regrets. Jonah sat across from Detective Rios in interview room 2, a square of beige walls, a table bolted to the floor, a battered file folder between them. He'd come without a lawyer. Maybe that was stupid. Maybe it was honest. Either way, it was done. Rios watched him with that quiet, hawk-like patience of people who'd seen too many men try to outrun their own shadows. You have a name for me? She asked. Jonah nodded. Tessa Wren, he said. She took the files. She sold them to a holding company called Eastgate Partners. I can show you the transactions. He slid a thumb drive across the table. His hands didn't shake. He thought they would, but there was a strange calm in surrender. Rios didn't touch the drive yet. You know what this means, right? She said. She's going to burn. Maybe others, too. You could still be tied to it. I know. And your wife? Rios asked, almost gently. Jonah's throat tightened. She deserves the truth, no matter what happens after. Rios gave a short nod, professional but almost respectful. You did the right thing, she said. Jonah didn't feel righteous. He felt gutted. Still, for the first time in months, he didn't feel lost. Claire drove without direction, the city bleeding past her in streaks of steel and neon. The weight of what Jonah had told her pressed against her ribs, heavy as an anchor. She thought she might sink right there in traffic, swallowed whole by indecision. The marriage wasn't salvageable, not the way it had been. Too much had been hollowed out. But something inside her, the stubborn, wounded core, wondered if survival had to look like victory. Maybe survival was quieter, messier. Maybe it meant walking away not with a clean break, but with a scar you learned to live around. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. Jenna, her sister. "Come over, wine, no judgment." Claire smiled despite herself. Jenna had always been the one who knew when to show up with exactly what you needed before you could name it. She turned the wheel, merging onto the Lakeshore Drive, heading south. Not home, not yet. She needed space between decision and action. She needed to breathe somewhere Jonah's ghost wouldn't reach her. As she drove, she thought about forgiveness, the shape of it, the cost. And she wondered, was forgiveness really for the guilty? Or was it for the ones left holding the broken pieces, deciding whether to bleed or to build? The sky cracked open over the water, streaking gray and violent gold. Storms always made things look cleaner from a distance. Up. Close, it was just rain and wreckage. End of Chapter 17. Chapter 18. Flight Instinct. Tessa Wren hadn't packed a bag. That was the first mistake. The second was assuming she still had time. She paced the length of her tiny apartment, the worn floorboards creaking under her bare feet. The TV played muted news footage, a reporter standing outside Dalton and Wexler, the firm's logo blurred behind police tape. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was public now. She was running out of moves. Her phone buzzed, a single name flashing on the cracked screen. Jonah. Tessa stared at it like it might burn her fingers. She knew what it meant. He had made his choice. It wasn't her. Of course it wasn't her. It never really was. She let the call go unanswered. Instead, she turned to the desk in the corner, yanking open drawers, scattering papers. There, under a pile of old bills, the emergency stash. $500 in 20s, a fake ID she hadn't thought about since college, and a cheap burner phone still sealed in plastic. Not much. Not enough. But maybe enough to get out of the city. She shoved the cash into her jacket pocket, slipped the burner into her bag. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere too close. She flinched, checked the window. No police yet. But they would come. Jonah had probably already handed them everything. Tessa grabbed her keys, shoved her sneakers on without tying them, and slipped into the night. The streets were wet, puddles catching reflections of streetlights in oily smears. She kept her head down, heart pounding against her ribs, steps quick but not frantic. She still had a plan. She could still get to the bus station, blend in, disappear for a while, figure it out later. She made it. 2 blocks before a figure stepped out from the mouth of an alley. Not a cop, worse, Vin Carter, private security. Cleaner for Eastgate Partners. The men who'd bought her stolen files, then decided she knew too much. Tessa stopped cold, every instinct screaming at once. Vin smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "You really should have been faster, Tess." She turned to run, but hands gripped her arms, dragging her back into the alley. Another man, bigger, silent. "You made a mess," Vin said, tightening his grip until she gasped. "Now you're going to help clean it up." She struggled, wild, but it was useless. Vin leaned in, breath hot and rancid. "Don't worry. We'll make it look like an overdose. Heroin, bad batch, no one will look too hard." Terror fractured through her. This was it. Not court, not trial, just erasure. "No!" she gasped, kicking out, connecting with something solid, a shin, a knee. But the grip didn't loosen. Vin laughed low and mean. "You should have stayed quiet, sweetheart." A black van rolled up to the curb, back doors already open. Panic narrowed her vision into a tunnel. She thought of Jonah, briefly. Claire. The wreckage she'd left in her wake. And then, a flash, a woman's voice, sharp and commanding. "Police! Let her go!" Red and blue lights flared across the alley walls. The men froze. Tessa stumbled, half collapsing to the ground. Footsteps. Shouts. In seconds, hands wrenched her attackers away. Detective Rios stood over Tessa, gun still drawn, face unreadable. "You're under arrest," Rios said coolly. "Both of you, get comfortable." Tessa gasped on the wet concrete, lungs burning, vision swimming. Alive. Barely. The weight of it, the consequences, the betrayals, the choices, crashed over her like a wave she couldn't outrun. Tessa closed her eyes as the handcuffs clicked shut around her attackers. It was over, or at least her part was. End of chapter 18. Next, it's time for Claire and Jonah's final confrontation. A private, intimate scene that will determine whether forgiveness, departure, or something in between is possible for them. Claire sat on the couch in the dark, one lamp casting a low circle of light across the living room. The house creaked in the cooling night air. Somewhere down the hall, the grandfather clock ticked, slow, steady, inevitable. The news was everywhere now. Jonah's firm had released a statement. Words like regret and internal investigation floated across the headlines. Tessa Wren had been arrested. Several partners were under federal scrutiny. Jonah had not been charged, yet, but his name was tainted. Claire had heard the whispers, already. She would hear more tomorrow. She sipped cold tea, waiting. When the door finally opened, she didn't turn around. Jonah stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. He didn't take off his coat, didn't move toward her, just stood there like a man unsure if he was welcome. Maybe he wasn't. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Did you think it would end differently?" Her voice was low, almost detached. But inside she felt raw, stripped bare. Jonah sank into the armchair across from her. He looked exhausted, more soul-deep than skin-deep. His eyes found hers and held. "No," he said. "Simple. Honest." Claire studied him. "I thought about leaving," she said. "Tonight." Jonah flinched slightly. "I wouldn't blame you." "I packed a bag," she said. "Got as far as the car." He waited. "I couldn't do it," Claire said, voice cracking just a little. "Not because of you. Not because I forgive you." Jonah leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles went white. "Because I realized," Claire continued, "that leaving wouldn't erase any of this. I'd still have to live with the part of me that stayed too long, trusted too much." Jonah's throat worked visibly. "Claire, No," she cut him off. "Don't apologize again. It doesn't matter. Not anymore." Silence pooled. Between them, thick and heavy. Finally, Claire asked the question that had been burning through her all night. Why her? Not how or when. Why? Jonah closed his eyes, breathed out shakily. "She saw me," he said, voice rough. "Not the good parts. Not the husband, the lawyer, the man who had it together. She saw everything. And she didn't ask me to be better." Claire stared at him, hollowed out by the brutal truth of it. "And I did," she said quietly. Jonah looked wrecked. "You deserved better." Claire shook her head slowly. "I deserved honesty," she said, "even if it was ugly." The clock chimed the hour. Midnight. Something shifted then. Some silent agreement. Some recognition that whatever they had been before could never fully return. What now? Jonah asked, voice almost a whisper. Claire rose, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "We rebuild," she said. "Separately." Jonah bowed his head. "But maybe," Claire added, surprising herself, "not forever." His head snapped up. Claire gave a small, sad smile. "I don't know who you'll be after this, Jonah. I don't know who I'll be either." She paused. "But maybe someday we can meet again, as strangers. Start from scratch. Hope flickered. Faint, almost painful. Jonah didn't try to stop her when she turned toward the stairs. Didn't follow. Somewhere inside her, Claire knew this was the right choice. Not punishment, not absolution. Just survival, just choosing herself, finally. Behind her, Jonah remained in the chair, a man sitting among the ashes of the life he'd burned down with his own hands. Neither of them said goodbye. They didn't have to. End of chapter 19. This would be a natural place to end. Open, bittersweet, with the future uncertain but not hopeless. However, if you like, I can write a brief epilogue set months later, showing either Claire or Jonah separately, offering a glimpse of what comes next. 6 months later, Claire stood on the balcony of her new apartment, a chipped coffee mug warming her hands. Below, the city moved in its restless, endless way, traffic crawling, horns echoing, strangers brushing past each other with practiced indifference. Above, the sky was the color of ash before sunrise, but a thin gold line pushed at the horizon, stubborn and alive. Claire breathed in the cold air, letting it settle in her lungs. The apartment was small, a rented one-bedroom, over a bookstore, but it was hers. No shared mortgage, no wedding pictures ghosting the walls. Just a few pieces of battered furniture she liked, and a slow, deliberate quiet she was learning to live with. She sipped her coffee and checked her phone. No new messages from Jonah. Not that she expected any. They had parted cleanly, wordlessly. After the separation papers were signed, she knew he was working again, somewhere smaller, less prestigious. Paying back the debts in ways that mattered. Maybe someday their paths would cross again. Maybe not. Claire set the mug down and pulled on her jacket. She had a job interview this morning. Project management for a nonprofit downtown. It wasn't. Law wasn't the shining career she once imagined. But it was work that felt honest, and that was enough for now. She caught her reflection in the glass as she passed, hair pulled back, face thinner, lines at the corners of her mouth that hadn't been there a year ago, but her eyes, they were clear. No more pretending. No more shrinking to fit someone else's story. Claire smiled, just a little, and headed down the stairs. The day was cold and full of noise, but it opened before her like a blank page, not perfect, not easy, but hers. And for the first time in a long time, Claire was ready to write something new. End of story. Thank you for trusting me to tell this story. The old brownstone Jonah had rented was quiet. Too quiet. It was far from the city center, in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The street was lined with crumbling buildings, each with its own story of decline. But it was his now. A shell. To keep his thoughts from becoming too loud. Jonah leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out the window at the rain that fell like a soft promise against the glass. The world felt muted in the morning fog. He hadn't slept much. Hadn't really rested at all since that night. The day Claire left, he'd been utterly empty. The years of pretending had stripped him bare, leaving only the ghost of the man he once thought he was. He thought about what she'd said, the way she had walked away without a single backward glance. It had been hard, hearing her say the things she had to say, but it was what she needed, what they both needed to start moving forward. But time was strange. It didn't heal everything, not by a long shot. But it did change the shape of things. The job was different now, the stakes smaller, the people less invested in his life. He had joined a mid-level firm, not a firm that could save anyone, but one that did the work that mattered. The kind of law that helped people who didn't have power to fight for themselves. He took it as a kind of penance. There was no prestige anymore, no recognition. But the work was honest. Jonah had tried to call Claire once, a few months ago. He thought he'd finally found words that might matter. But when he heard the voicemail and the polite distance in her voice, he realized he had no right to expect her to listen. She had let him go. Let him go just like that. and part of him was grateful for it. Part of him understood. He stared at his reflection in the darkened window. He was a different man now. Not the man who had slept with Tessa, who had spun lies into every interaction. No longer the man who betrayed his wife out of some twisted need to be seen. He had learned to sit with his own shame. To sit in the quiet and let it be. There was still a flicker of hope left, buried deep. Not for reconciliation with Claire, not for some romanticized return to the life they'd shared, but for something else. Maybe someday he would be worthy of the person he had once been. Maybe he would be able to look Claire in the eyes again without shame, but not yet. Not now. Jonah took a deep breath and turned away from the window. It was time to go to work.